everybody. Welcome to the St. Michael's Podcast, Episode 2. Today we're doing a Q&A with our special guest, Father Aaron. And for our first question, what did you do before you were a priest?
Well, before I was a priest, I was an art teacher in Washington, D.C., teaching in Fairfax County Public School Corporations. I taught there for 2 years. My first day teaching was 9/11, so that was a rather interesting one. So that's what I did before.
When did you decide to become a priest, and why did you choose that?
Well, growing up, I was Protestant growing up. There were times I had thought when I was growing up in the Protestant church about possibly being a minister. I went to Anderson University, which is a Church of God school affiliated with the Church of God in Anderson, Indiana. I wasn't really a part of that church community itself. I kind of, like many people, searched for a church to belong to during college and finally landed on the Catholic Church my last year at Anderson. And then it was during that time period that I started thinking about possibly being a deacon, because at that time I had a girlfriend, and that's one of the reasons I moved out to D.C. is to see where that relationship would go, and obviously it didn't go because I became a priest and can't be married when you're a priest. So that's where I started thinking about possibly being a deacon, and then after I was in D.C. and I was no longer dating the girl that I moved out there for, that's when I started to really seriously discern possibly studying for the priesthood. So I came back to Indiana and started studying, then.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you become priests and the process of that?
Sure. So you typically come back and you study at a seminary, and it's a boarding school basically at the master's degree level or doctorate level. So further studies. Couldn't get a doctorate there, but you could definitely we got master's degrees and things like that. So, but you live there, and so it is a place where you're living with the other guys who are studying to be a priest. You're living with your formators, your teachers, and the other priests and people who are in charge of forming you into being a priest. And then, that process goes on for 4 to 5 years, depending on your education before. Because I didn't have a philosophy degree or a theological degree before I went into seminary, I had to go an extra year to get that philosophy degree first. So I got enough hours in to do basically a master's degree in philosophy or Catholic thought, and then a master's of divinity. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah. So what would you say your favorite thing about being a priest is?
Being with people and being with them in the special moments and seeing those moments of conversion in their life and seeing how God can truly impact their life if they open themselves up to that.
What is your favorite part of the Mass while you're...
It's when I dismiss you and I get to go home. My favorite part is, I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about it. I guess, it would be the words of institution, putting ourselves in the place of Christ at that moment, and both his sacrifice on the cross and the Last Supper, and just being able to witness the miracle of him coming into the world. That is definitely kind of the highlight of Mass, but definitely one of the most special moments every time I, praying Mass.
Do you like being the priest here at St. Michael's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the community. I grew up in Rushville, so this is pretty close to my family. My sister lives up in Pendleton with her kids and husband, and so it's nice. It's a nice community. It's growing, so I don't know if I'll like it in 10 years when it's super big, but I like the smaller town feel to it. So, but yeah, this was a community that I was involved with, and I knew Father Severin kind of in seminary and visited here a couple times during that period. So this place has always been kind of familiar to me. And yeah.
So what is one thing you would change about the church if there is one?
By church, what do you mean?
Like our church at
St. Michael's specifically?
Like the people or the building or?
Either or.
The community.
Okay. Community. Well, I always, as a pastor, I'm always most concerned with just getting people to be connected to the parish and actually give themselves to the parish by showing up and giving themselves to the mission of the parish, which is to help those in need in our community. So that is always the thing that I think all pastors are always kind of frustrated and challenged by, is how do you get people to do that? As an example, we have 2,000 people on our books in our parish, but on a weekend I'll see 750. So obviously there's a disconnect there with what it means to be Catholic and showing up. So that's always a challenge. I guess if I had to do one thing for our campus, it would just be to continue the building program that we did, which was to try to move the parish offices over to between the school gym and the church itself, and then have another larger meeting room for 80 to 100 people to be able to have a meal in there. That would free up the parish offices for more room for the school to spread out a bit, and then meeting rooms and things like that. So that would kind of truly complete our master plan that we began even before I got here about 10 years ago.
So now we have some questions that aren't directly linked to the priesthood but have to do with the church. So are the teaching of past popes who have done awful things, are those teachings still infallible?
Well, not every teaching of the Pope is infallible. So just because the Pope opens his mouth and says something doesn't mean that it's automatically infallible. There are only a few teachings of the Church by a Pope that we would consider infallible. I forget the number, but it's definitely below 20. So the Pope is still a person, and the Pope can at times still make mistakes. We think that the Holy Spirit is there to guide him and stuff, but we have plenty of history in the church. Even in the Bible, you can see St. Paul going up to St. Peter and giving a hard time about something that he's doing and challenging the Pope in some way to change a practice that he's doing or something like that. So there's always kind of that give and tug there. That's why we have the apostles. They kind of act hopefully as a brotherhood where they're all working together, and in even the people, like the Immaculate Conception. That's an infallible thing declared by the Pope in the 1800s. Well, that really came about because the people of God wanted that. That wasn't just him waking up one day with an idea. That was hundreds of years of people kind of pushing for this and doing that. You can go even to Spain, and they would have artwork, kind of almost like propaganda, but I wouldn't say a picture of the Blessed Virgin Mary as the Immaculate Conception would have been propaganda. But they were obviously very concerned in wanting that to happen. So do that. But at the same time that doctrine was being debated and the Pope was considering it, the Dominicans in Rome were very much against it. And they actually were having a prayer vigil the night that doctrine was being decided, and they were praying that it wouldn't happen. So that goes back to your last question, which is like, how do you have that dialogue? But as soon as it was declared, they got up and sang the hymn, the Te Deum, which is a beautiful hymn of thanksgiving, and they rang the bells in celebration of the doctrine. So they recognized that they were incorrect, and they moved on.
Do saints go straight to heaven without going to purgatory first?
That's a good question. I don't know. I wouldn't know exactly. I don't know. Because, nobody's really seen what happens afterwards in that process. But there's probably some kind of final purification before we can meet the Lord, for no matter who of us, because even the saints have sinned, are sinning, or did sin. That's why they went to confession all the time. So yeah, there's probably some kind of purification involved in there. The Blessed Mary didn't. That's what the assumption's about, her going straight into heaven. So, but yeah.
So speaking of stuff like that, can we pray for people in hell, and if so, what happens with those prayers?
Well, are you thinking of someone in particular? I think that would be the thing that I would be concerned about, is that it's very presumptuous to assume that someone's in heaven or to assume someone's in hell. And so we should just pray for them. We should just pray for our loved ones who have passed. We can even ask them to pray for us. And so let's say that the person that we are praying for or with is in hell. Well, the Lord is still going to take those graces from those prayers and still somehow use them to bring about good in his life, or our life, or his world. So yeah. Does that make sense?
So now anybody who has questions can come up and ask.
What is your favorite board game or tabletop game?
My favorite board game or tabletop game? Well, I don't really have a favorite. I have favorite periods that I like to play. And so I like what's called the horse and musket era, which is basically guys with guns and horses running around. So you've got the American Civil War, you have the American Revolutionary War, 1812, 7 Years War, that sort of period. So 1700s, 1800s is kind of my favorite period of warfare, to kind of recreate and think about like what it really means. So like same thing with like the American Civil War. We'll have a reenactor here tomorrow to talk to you guys about how they would fight and how they would march and all that, and just thinking about those guys like marching across an open field so that they can get shot at is pretty staggering, the bravery that they had. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can we discuss Catholic social teaching versus free market capitalism, capitalist economic theory?
Okay. So is there a particular aspect that you really wanted to address of that, or just a very general overview?
Just in general, I've seen that like some like Catholic teachings aren't like particularly good for the economy and conflict with free market capitalistic views.
Yes, that is very much the case. The Catholic social teaching is always that the individual, the person, comes first. And so we try to establish a thing that would support everyone. And of course, everyone's, as the saying goes, like all boats are raised by a rising tide. And so a better economy raises everybody up. But we work especially to not keep people behind. So that's why the Catholic Church has, if you think about Indianapolis itself, we have 2 huge Catholic hospitals that we've put time and treasure into to help people who are in need and to do those things. Same thing with Catholic schools. One of the major ways to raise people out of poverty is by education. And so we have always worked to do that. You have to remember that in America, Catholics immigrating to America were often exiled. They were often pushed out because it was very much a Protestant country when it was founded, and so the church was always very concerned with kind of those extremes, those people on the edges, and so the church certainly is fine with capitalism, but not at the expense of everyone else. So it would not be in favor of like billionaires probably launching rockets into space instead of helping the poor and needy in this world. So does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
So, do you think that the people who are cremated should go to heaven or purgatory?
Well, the church allows for cremation, but when we do that, we do so to allow. We still have to treat that body as a body. So, so the church, says that that's a valid thing, particularly in areas where, overcrowding in cemeteries is getting there. We don't have that in America because we have so much land and we're a fairly new country. But you go over to places like England or Europe, and it's just like bodies are piled upon bodies, and everybody's running out of room. And so, there needs to be a reverence for the body because we believe in the resurrection. In past, there were certain faiths, and still today, there are certain faiths who do cremation because they don't believe that the body is worth anything after that. But that's not what we believe as Catholics. We believe that the body is still the body. We will be raised with the body, and so we need to reverence that body, even though it's not animated at that point. So, does that make sense?
Any last questions for Father?
Here. So going back to the teaching of the Pope when it's infallible, when is it infallible? And I think that we talked about it, but in class, but I don't remember if it was this class. And the question that I have is, I remember hearing Pope Francis saying, when you wear a mask, you're like being a good friend or good Catholic to other people. And I'm like, so people took that and ran with it, but that wasn't an infallible teaching from the chair, how do we know when it's infallible?
He basically comes out and says it.
He'll say this is infallible.
It's a very explicit thing. When it was first starting to become a thing, it was 300 years ago, and in typical fashion, it kind of gets codified as it moves forward. So if there's an infallible statement by the Pope today, it says we hold this as an infallible teaching.
Okay.
So,
say it,
Yep. Other things, no. So, we should follow and take great concern in what he says, and sometimes that challenges us, for sure. But no, everything he says is not infallible by any stretch of imagination.
Is Dungeons and Dragons bad? Is it against church teachings? Because some things in it are inappropriate, and my parents are considering if I could play it.
So you're trying to make an
asking,
argument.
Is there anything?
Yeah. Well, like all things can be used for good and used for bad. So when I was your age, actually when I was younger than you, Dungeons and Dragons first came out, and so I forget what they called it. It was there was a big, huge concern. It was in the news every night. This game and blah blah blah. Well, the guy who made it is Gary Gygax. He made it because he was playing miniatures, and it started off as a miniatures game. And so they started doing this, and then it developed, and then it grew. So like all things, even in wargaming that we do, I do it because I love the historical side of it, and I love to kind of put myself, even in the slightest bit, into what did these commanders have to do, what did these men have to do to kind of make this happen. And then when you're removing troops because guys are dying, it's well, that's generations of people dying there, and it's just, and so it's very sombering, and it helps me to understand better this is why we don't want war because it's terrible. But within the wargaming community, there's certainly people who would take that and do the exact opposite. They play kind of terrible sides like SS troops and kind of emphasize that and get all super fascinated by that, and that's a bad thing. And so it depends on the group that you play with. It can be all games are there to help you be creative and to kind of have an imagination, and it's great. If you read the book of Revelation, St. John had a lot of an imagination in that, and he was putting all that stuff out, and it's fascinated us for centuries. So there's dragons and things like that in there. It's just we have to understand that it's a game and that it's not real, But we can allow that to have power over our life in such a way that it distracts us from doing what we need to do. But in those rules, a good role-playing game is going to make you decide on certain moral choices, and you're playing a character. So it's kind of in that way, it's kind of like a movie. Like, we don't think of an actor like Heath Ledger playing the Joker and saying, oh, Heath Ledger's a terrible person because he played that character. We actually say, no, he's a great actor because he was able to kind of use that and bring about something that was in some ways very terrifying, but it helped us as a people understand, oh, this is what evil can really look like. That you have to put yourself into a certain mental space there, and that can sometimes be damaging if you're not fully aware of that. So it's a game, and you have to kind of keep it there, and you have to keep that in mind, and you have to pay attention to who you surround yourself with, because there's plenty of things, people that will take you down bad roads. So does that make sense?
Probably not just who you're with, but like who you are. I mean, maybe at the time, maybe your parents have a feeling that maybe you'll be able to play it better when you're a little bit older, or you'll understand things better, or like there are different reasons why you would wait.
And there's other role-playing games other than Dungeons and Dragons. Like, my favorite role-playing game is actually a Star Wars role-playing game, because it's got a really cool mechanic in it, and instead of saying rolling a dice and you get a score and it says, yep, you win because you got this score, it says, okay, well, you succeeded, but there's some threats that have occurred. So, think about Star Wars. It's like you shoot the doorbell and the door goes down, but it doesn't go down all the way. So it's very story oriented, which is kind of fun. And it's Star Wars, so it's like, whatever. Someone playing Yoda is that, or Darth Vader. Like, we see those people more as characters, I think, sometimes. So there's all kinds of different options. I mean, there's role-playing games for, like special operations, terrorists, counter-terror. I mean, it's just endless what's out there. So, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do you have any words of advice for our 8th graders?
I don't know. I have lots of words of advice, but it depends on the topic.
As they're leaving, getting ready to move to high school.
Yeah. No, I think, you just have to be very aware of who your friends are, who you're giving yourself to, who you're giving your time to, and also what you're giving your time to. Because from here on out, everything is going to compete with your time even more. And a lot of times, the stuff that appears to be most boring or hard is actually the stuff that is best for you. So if you think about it in sports terms, we like to just show up and play a game, but the reality is that practice is really where you become a better player, and it allows you to have a lot more fun while you play the game because you're better. And if you practice with your team, then it allows you guys to achieve more. And so the same thing, I think, is true with faith life and all the other important things in your life as you move forward from here, is that you got to give your time to that, even though it might be boring, even though it might be annoying, and you don't want to do it. Oftentimes, those are the things that are best for us, and the world is going to compete with that in the rest of our life. So I think that's my biggest little piece of advice.
With that closing piece of advice, we are going to wrap up our podcast. That was Father Aaron. I am Keaton Knowlton. To the right of me is Ruthie Dobbs. Across the table, Wade Morris. And running all of our tech is Brady Cannett. We'd like to thank Father Aaron for taking out of his day to come here and talk with us. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you all for listening. God bless.